The officers knocked on the door of the suburban house. Standard wellness check. A neighbor had called saying they hadn't seen the elderly woman who lived there in over a week. Her car was in the driveway. Her lights were on at night. But she never answered the door. The officers knocked again. No answer. They could hear a television playing inside. Could see movement through the curtains. They announced themselves. Still nothing. Following protocol, they entered through the unlocked back door. The house was clean. Perfectly organized. Nothing disturbed. The TV was playing in the living room. And sitting in a chair, facing the television, was the elderly woman. She didn't turn around when they entered. Didn't acknowledge them. One officer approached and gently touched her shoulder. She turned her head slowly. Smiled. And said in a perfectly calm voice, "Oh good. You're finally here. I've been waiting for you to find them." The officers asked who she was talking about. She pointed to the basement door. "They're downstairs. All 7 of them. I didn't know what else to do with them." In the basement, officers found 7 bodies. All perfectly preserved. All arranged in chairs facing each other like they were having a conversation. And before I tell you who they were and reveal what this discovery meant for a case that had been cold for 15 years, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, because what police find in quiet houses will haunt you long after this video ends. Wellness checks are routine. Police get called to quiet houses every day. Usually it's nothing. An elderly person who didn't hear the phone. Someone who went on vacation and forgot to tell the neighbors. Someone who just wants to be left alone. But sometimes, officers walk into a house that looks completely normal from the outside and find something that changes everything. Something that turns a simple wellness check into a major investigation. Something that reveals secrets hidden for years, decades, sometimes generations. These are those cases. These are the quiet houses that weren't quiet at all. And once you hear what police found inside, you'll understand why some officers still have nightmares about knocking on certain doors. Let's go back to the case that opened this story. The elderly woman's name was Dorothy Simmons. She was 73 years old. Lived alone. The neighbors said she was quiet, polite, kept to herself. When officers found the 7 bodies in her basement, they initially thought they'd discovered a serial killer. But the investigation revealed something far stranger. The bodies were people who'd gone missing from the area over a 15-year period. Different ages, different backgrounds, different circumstances. No obvious connection. Dorothy confessed immediately. Said she'd killed them all. But here's where it gets disturbing. Dorothy had dementia. Advanced dementia. She couldn't remember her own daughter's name. Couldn't remember what year it was. But she could describe each murder in perfect detail. She said each person had come to her house asking for help. She'd invited them in. Given them tea. Poisoned the tea. Then dragged their bodies to the basement and arranged them in chairs because she didn't want them to be lonely. She'd been visiting them every day for 15 years. Talking to them. Bringing them meals. Treating them like dinner guests who never left. Investigators were stunned. How had a woman with severe dementia successfully killed 7 people over 15 years without getting caught? How had she managed to preserve the bodies? How had she hidden the smell, the evidence, everything? And most disturbing, was Dorothy actually the killer? Or was she confessing to crimes someone else committed? The case went to trial. Dorothy was found competent to stand trial despite the dementia. She was convicted of 7 counts of murder. But investigators still have doubts. Dorothy's daughter had lived in the house until 10 years ago. She claimed she never went in the basement. Never saw anything suspicious. But some investigators think she knew. Think maybe she was involved. Think maybe Dorothy is protecting her. The daughter was never charged. Lives in another state now. And Dorothy died in prison 2 years later, still insisting she did it all alone. The case is officially closed. But detectives who worked it say something doesn't add up. The quiet house on a quiet street held 7 bodies. And they're still not entirely sure how they got there. Now let me tell you about a wellness check in Portland, Oregon that uncovered something even more disturbing. Officers were called to check on a man named Gerald Frampton. He was 68, lived alone, and his mail had been piling up for 3 weeks. Officers knocked. No answer. Looked through windows. The house appeared empty. They entered through a window. The house was immaculate. Everything in perfect order. Too perfect. Like a showroom. No dishes in the sink. No clutter. No signs anyone actually lived there. They found Gerald in the master bedroom. Sitting in a chair. Dead. Had been dead for approximately 3 weeks based on decomposition. Natural causes, it appeared. Heart attack. But that's not what changed the case. What changed everything was what they found in the other bedrooms. 3 bedrooms. 3 beds. 3 people sleeping in those beds. All alive. All drugged. All strangers. Officers called for backup and paramedics. The 3 people were taken to hospitals. When they woke up, they had no idea where they were or how they got there. One was a homeless man who'd been missing for 6 months. One was a runaway teenager missing for 3 months. One was a college student who disappeared 2 months ago. All 3 had similar stories. They'd met Gerald. He'd seemed kind. Offered them food, a place to stay. They'd accepted. They remembered eating dinner. Then nothing. They'd been unconscious for months. Drugged. Kept alive but unconscious. In Gerald's house. Investigation revealed Gerald had been doing this for years. He'd lost his family in a car accident 10 years earlier. Wife and 2 children. He couldn't cope with the empty house. So he filled it. With strangers. Kept them unconscious so they wouldn't leave. So he could pretend he still had a family. He'd feed them through IVs. Keep them clean. Change their clothes. All while they were unconscious. Police found journals where Gerald wrote about his family. About conversations he'd have with them while they were unconscious. About how much he loved them. How he couldn't bear to lose another family. The 3 victims survived but had severe muscle atrophy from months of immobility. Required extensive physical therapy. Suffered psychological trauma. And the disturbing part, if Gerald hadn't died of a heart attack, he would have continued indefinitely. The victims would have remained unconscious in that quiet house until they died or Gerald made a mistake. The case raised legal questions. Could you charge a dead man? The prosecutor filed charges posthumously for the record. But Gerald never faced justice. His victims say the worst part is knowing he thought he was caring for them. Thought he was loving them, when he was really keeping them prisoner in their own unconscious minds. Let's talk about what police found in a quiet farmhouse in rural Iowa. Officers were called for a wellness check on an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who hadn't been seen in town for over a month. The farmhouse was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor. Officers arrived and immediately noticed the smell. That distinct smell that means death. They entered the house expecting to find the couple deceased. They found them in the kitchen, both dead, sitting at the table. Appeared to have been dead for several weeks. But here's what made officers call for detectives: the table was set for 12 people. 12 plates. 12 sets of silverware. 12 glasses. But only 2 bodies. Then they searched the rest of the house. In the living room, they found 10 chairs arranged in a circle. In each chair, a mannequin, dressed in clothes, with wigs, with names pinned to them. The Hendersons had created an entire fake family. Investigation revealed the couple had been estranged from their real children for decades. Some family dispute that was never resolved. But they desperately wanted family around them. So they created one. Bought mannequins. Dressed them. Named them. Had meals with them. Had conversations with them. Their journals showed they'd been doing this for at least 5 years. They'd write about what each family member said that day. What they did. What they thought. The couple had constructed an elaborate delusion to cope with loneliness. And when they died at a family dinner. Surrounded by the fake family they'd created because the real one wouldn't come. Officers said it was the saddest thing they'd ever seen. The quiet farmhouse held 2 bodies and 10 mannequins. And a lifetime of loneliness that drove 2 people to create imaginary companions just to feel less alone. Here's a case that started as a wellness check and became a missing person investigation. Officers in Seattle were called to check on a young woman named Emma Wright. Her employer said she hadn't shown up for work in a week. Wasn't answering calls. Officers entered her apartment. It was pristine. Almost too clean. Like someone had scrubbed everything. Emma's purse was there. Her phone. Her keys. Her car in the parking lot. But Emma was gone. Detectives were called. They processed it as a crime scene. Found something strange, a hidden camera. Multiple hidden cameras throughout the apartment. And they'd been recently installed. All pointed at the apartment across the hall. Detectives got a warrant for that apartment. The tenant was a man named Robert Chen. Quiet. Kept to himself. His apartment was filled with monitors showing feeds from the cameras in Emma's apartment. And photos. Thousands of photos of Emma. On his walls. In albums. Everywhere. But no Emma. Robert was arrested. During interrogation, he claimed he loved Emma. Had been watching her for 2 years. But swore he didn't hurt her. Said she left on her own 3 days ago. Walked out with a suitcase. He had video to prove it. Detectives reviewed the footage. Robert was right. Emma was seen leaving her apartment with luggage. Looking nervous. Looking over her shoulder. Getting into a cab. But where did she go? Detectives tracked the cab. It had dropped Emma at a bus station. She'd bought a ticket to Portland under a fake name. They found her in Portland 3 days later. Alive. Hiding. She said she discovered the cameras a week earlier. Realized someone was watching her. She was terrified. Didn't know who or why. So she ran. Didn't tell anyone because she didn't know who to trust. Robert was charged with stalking and illegal surveillance. Emma got a restraining order. But here's the disturbing part, Emma said she'd felt watched for over a year. Felt like someone was always there. But she dismissed it as paranoia. Told herself she was being silly. Ignored her instincts. And someone really was watching. Every moment. For 2 years. The quiet apartment across the hall held a man obsessed. And if Emma hadn't trusted her instincts and run, detectives think Robert's obsession would have escalated. Would have turned violent. The wellness check for a missing person became a stalking case that prevented something worse. Now let me tell you about a case in rural Tennessee that revealed a secret kept for 3 generations. Officers were called to check on the residents of an old farmhouse. No one had seen them in months. The property looked abandoned. Officers entered and found an elderly woman, Mary Hutchins, barely alive. Malnourished. Dehydrated. Sitting in a rocking chair. She'd been there alone for at least 6 weeks. But that's not what made the case. What changed everything was what officers found in the root cellar. Dozens of journals. Dating back to 1920. 3 generations of the Hutchins family. And every single journal described the same thing, voices in the walls. The entries spanned nearly 100 years. Great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, all writing about voices. Whispers. Conversations. Coming from inside the walls of the house. Each generation tried to explain it. Tried to understand it. Some thought it was spirits. Some thought it was mental illness. Some thought the house was haunted. But all of them heard it. And all of them documented it. Mary's final entries described the voices getting louder. More aggressive. Telling her things. Warning her about people. Telling her to stay in the house. Not to leave. Not to let anyone in. She'd been following the voices' instructions for months. Isolating herself. Starving herself. Because the voices told her to. Structural engineers were called to examine the house. They found something. The house was built over a massive natural cave system. And the acoustics of the caves, combined with underground water flow, created sounds that echoed up through the walls. Sounds that could seem like voices. Especially to someone alone and isolated. 3 generations of the Hutchins family had been hearing natural phenomena and interpreting it as something supernatural. And it had driven Mary to near death. She recovered physically but never mentally. She insisted until she died that the voices were real. Were entities. Were trying to communicate. Scientists could explain the acoustic phenomenon. But they couldn't explain why the voices seemed to respond to the family. Why they seemed intelligent. Why they gave instructions. Mary said science was wrong. The voices were real. And the quiet farmhouse that had terrified 3 generations of women was demolished. The land sold. And Mary died in a nursing home, still hearing voices that everyone said didn't exist. Let's talk about a wellness check in Boston that uncovered an underground bunker. Officers were called to check on a family. The Rothwells. Parents and 2 teenage children. Neighbors said they hadn't seen them in months. The house looked occupied but no one answered. Officers entered. The house was empty. Completely empty. No furniture. No belongings. Nothing. Just empty rooms. Then they found the entrance. Hidden under a rug in the basement. A hatch leading down. Officers called for backup before descending. What they found was a fully functioning underground bunker. The entire family living below ground. By choice. The father, David Rothwell, believed society was collapsing. Had spent 5 years building this bunker. Then moved his family down there permanently. The family had been underground for 8 months. Living on stockpiled food and water. Homeschooling the children. Never leaving. The mother seemed brainwashed. The children seemed traumatized. But legally, it was complicated. The father wasn't breaking any laws. The children weren't being physically abused. They were fed, educated, sheltered. Child services investigated but couldn't remove the children. Eventually, the mother took the children and left. Filed for divorce. But the father remains in that bunker. Living underground. Waiting for a collapse that hasn't come. Officers said the quiet house on a normal street had an entire hidden world beneath it. A world where a man had imprisoned his family based on paranoid delusions. And the law couldn't stop him until his wife found the courage to leave. Here's one final case. A wellness check in New Mexico that revealed something that still has investigators confused. Officers were called to check on a man who lived alone in the desert. Marcus Shaw. He'd missed several appointments. Friends were worried. Officers drove out to his isolated property. Knocked on the door of his small house. No answer. They entered. Marcus was there. Alive. Sitting at his desk. Writing. He didn't acknowledge the officers at first. Just kept writing frantically. When officers spoke to him, he looked up confused. Said, "You're early. I wasn't supposed to be found for another 3 days." Officers asked what he meant. Marcus pointed to his computer. On screen was a document titled Timeline. It listed events, including the date and time officers would arrive at his house. The time was accurate to within 5 minutes. Marcus said he'd been receiving information. From where, he didn't know. He'd write down what he was told. And it always came true. He'd predicted minor things at first. Then bigger things. The document showed predictions for the next 6 months. Stock market crashes. Natural disasters. Political events. Officers thought Marcus was delusional. Until they checked some of his previous predictions. They'd come true. Specific events predicted weeks in advance. Investigators couldn't explain it. Marcus was taken for psychiatric evaluation. Found to be completely sane. No signs of delusion or psychosis. He was released. Told to stop making predictions because it was causing concern. Marcus disappeared 2 weeks later. His house was empty. His computer gone. His documents gone. And 3 months later, several of his predictions came true. Exactly as he'd written them. The case remains open. Marcus Shaw is still missing. And investigators still don't know if he was genuinely predicting the future or if something else was happening. The quiet house in the desert held a man who knew things he shouldn't know. And when they found him, he told them they were early. Like he'd been waiting for them to arrive on a specific schedule that only he could see. So here we are. You've heard about the quiet houses. Dorothy's basement full of bodies arranged like dinner guests. Gerald's house full of unconscious strangers he thought were family. The Hendersons' farmhouse where mannequins replaced children. Emma's apartment being watched from across the hall. The Hutchins house built over caves that whispered for 3 generations. The Rothwell's bunker hiding a family underground. And Marcus Shaw's desert house where he wrote the future. These cases prove that quiet houses aren't always empty houses. Sometimes they're hiding secrets. Sometimes they're hiding crimes. Sometimes they're hiding people who've disappeared from the world. And sometimes they're hiding things we can't explain. Things that make investigators question what's possible. Officers who've responded to these wellness checks say it changes how you see every door you knock on. Every quiet house becomes a mystery. Every unanswered door becomes a question. What's really on the other side? Is it just someone who wants privacy? Or is it something that will change everything once you see it? The quiet houses that seemed peaceful from the outside held horror, sadness, obsession, delusion, and mystery. Held secrets that had been kept for days or years or generations. And when police finally entered, when they finally saw what was hidden, the cases changed forever. Simple wellness checks became murder investigations, became rescues, became mysteries that might never be solved. Because quiet houses keep secrets. And sometimes, those secrets are darker than anyone imagined. So the next time you pass a quiet house, a house where the lights are on but no one seems to be home, a house where the neighbors haven't seen anyone in weeks, remember these stories. Remember that quiet doesn't mean empty. Doesn't mean safe. Doesn't mean normal. Sometimes quiet just means hidden. And what's hidden might be waiting to be found. Waiting for officers to knock on the door and step inside and discover what changed the case forever.